Fiscal deficit refers to a situation where a government spending surpasses its income in a particular financial year, or in simpler terms, it's the amount of money a government borrows to cover the gap between what it brings in, that is the revenue, and what it spends or the expenditure. The government grappled with a widening fiscal deficit due to reduced tax revenues and increased expenditure on healthcare, especially during and after the coronavirus pandemic. Other reasons were social welfare and the economic stimulus measures that was given to support the businesses and individuals affected by the pandemic. If we look at the history of India's fiscal deficit, in the pre 1990 era, deficits were moderate, but it started rising, particularly due to subsidies and the welfare programs. By 1990, alarming deficit levels triggered a balance of payment crisis. This crisis led to economic reforms focused on reducing government intervention and controlling deficits. Post the reform era, that is after 1990, fiscal discipline improved and deficits were brought under control. However, there were exceptions like the high deficit in 2009 due to global financial crisis and the stimulus measures taken in response. So the question is, how do we control the fiscal deficit? So there are two major approaches. One is by increasing the revenue, and the second approach is by reducing expenditure. So by boosting economic growth, we can have a strong and growing economy that would naturally generate more tax for the government. Second is that the government can explore broadening the tax base or revising tax rates due to revenue collection. And the third method is that by streamlining tax collection processes and reducing evasion can significantly improve government revenue. The second approach, that is reducing expenditure, says that governments can analyze their spending pattern and prioritize essential expenditures like the infrastructure and social programs. Subsidies can be another major source of government spending, and reviewing and reforming subsidies, especially the efficient ones, can free up resources. And lastly, implementing measures to improve efficiency within the government can lead to cost saving. If we look at the current situation of India, then Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said that the government expects fiscal deficit to be 5.1% of the gross domestic product for the financial year 2024 and 2025. She also added that we continue on the path of fiscal consolidation as announced in my budget speech for 2021-2022 to reduce fiscal deficit below 4.5% by 2025-2026. The fiscal deficit in 2024-2025 is estimated to be 5.1% of the GDP, adhering to that path. Components of fiscal deficit majorly include number one, the revenue deficit. This refers to the shortfall in revenue receipts compared to the revenue expenditures. When revenue expenditure exceeds the revenue receipts, it leads to a revenue deficit. The second component is the capital deficit or the capital expenditure. It occurs when the government's capital expenditure exceeds its total capital receipts. It includes investments in infrastructure, capital assets, and other development projects aimed at enhancing long-term economic growth. Capital receipts consists of borrowing, disinvestment proceeds, and grants for capital projects. The third component is the primary deficit, which is the fiscal deficit excluding interest payments on past borrowings. It provides a measure of the government's borrowing requirements for current operations and excluding the burden of servicing past debt. And the final component is the total fiscal deficit, which is the sum of revenue deficit and the capital deficit. It represents the overall shortfall between the total revenue and the total expenditures.